I've been in Ellie's life since she was 8 years old. Her mother, Diana, and I met at a company picnic when Ellie was just a shy kid hiding behind her mom's legs. Diana had been divorced for 3 years by then, her ex-husband Mark having decided that family life wasn't for him. He'd moved across the country to pursue his career and, from what Diana told me, his contact with Ellie had become sporadic at best. I fell in love with both of them, Diana's strength and Ellie's quiet determination. I still remember the day Ellie first called me Dad. She was 10, and I'd spent the whole weekend helping her build a science project. When she won first place, she threw her arms around me and said, "Thanks, Dad." I'm not ashamed to admit I cried that night after tucking her in. For 12 years, I was there for everything. The awkward middle school years, her first heartbreak, teaching her to drive, God help me, college applications, and moving her into her dorm. When Mark would cancel his twice-yearly visits, I'd be the one holding her while she cried. Diana and I never badmouthed him. We simply tried to be there to pick up the pieces. Then something changed when Ellie turned 20. Mark suddenly got back in touch, claiming he'd had some kind of epiphany about family. He started calling regularly, sending extravagant gifts, and visiting more often. Diana and I were cautiously optimistic. Maybe he'd finally grown up. Ellie was guarded at first, but gradually warmed to him. I encouraged the relationship, believing every child deserves to know their biological parents if possible. What I didn't expect was how quickly Mark would try to rewrite history, telling stories about how he'd always wanted to be more involved, but couldn't because of circumstances. When Ellie met Jacob in her senior year of college, things accelerated. Jacob came from money, old money, and suddenly Mark was very interested in being part of Ellie's life. The engagement came 6 months after graduation, and the wedding planning began immediately. At first, I was involved in everything. Ellie asked my opinion on venues, asked me to taste test cakes, and we even went suit shopping together. But as the wedding drew closer, I noticed I was being included less and less. Mark, meanwhile, was suddenly everywhere. The final blow came 3 months before the wedding. Ellie invited Diana and me to dinner, fidgeting nervously with her napkin before finally blurting out, "I want my real dad to walk me down the aisle." The restaurant seemed to go silent around us. Diana reached for my hand under the table, squeezing it tightly. "I know you've been there for me," Ellie continued, not quite meeting my eyes. "And I appreciate everything. But this is something I've always dreamed of. Dad, Mark has really changed, and this would mean so much to both of us." I somehow managed to nod and say I understood. What else could I do? Cause a scene? Make her wedding planning more stressful? But something inside me broke that day. The next 3 months were a study in quiet humiliation. I was still expected to attend all the pre-wedding events, the engagement party, the rehearsal dinner, the bachelor party for Jacob, but I was clearly an afterthought. Mark was front and center in all the photos, telling everyone who would listen about his little girl. Most of Ellie's extended family knew the truth, shooting me sympathetic glances when Mark would go on about Daddy's little princess. But Jacob's family accepted the narrative without question. Diana was furious on my behalf, but I begged her not to make a scene. "This is Ellie's day," I kept saying, though each time the words felt more hollow. I had raised this child, loved her, supported her through everything, and now I was being relegated to mom's husband status. A week before the wedding, Ellie and Jacob invited us over for dinner. The conversation turned to wedding expenses, and Jacob casually mentioned that the final payment to the venue was due. "Dad already covered the flowers and photography," Ellie said, and it took me a moment to realize she meant Mark. "But we're hoping you can handle the venue payment. It's only $20,000. My heart stopped. $20,000. Just thrown out there like it was nothing. "You never mentioned anything about us paying for the venue," Diana said carefully. Ellie looked confused. "But you always said you'd help with my wedding." I assumed that meant financially. I sat there digesting this. Through all the wedding planning, through being pushed aside for Mark, not once had Ellie or Jacob directly discussed finances with us. They had simply assumed. "We were planning to contribute," I said slowly. "But $20,000 is a lot of money, Ellie. That's more than we had budgeted." Jacob stepped in then, all smooth confidence. "My parents are covering the catering and the band. And you know Mark is in a tight spot financially right now with his new business venture." There it was. Mark, the returning hero father, had talked a big game, but couldn't actually deliver. So they had turned to the reliable stepfather who had always been there with his checkbook. "We'll figure something out," Diana said, squeezing my knee under the table. The conversation moved on, but my mind was reeling. Later that night, Diana and I had a frank discussion about our finances. We had been saving for a trip to Europe for our 20th anniversary, money that could be redirected to the wedding. It would hurt, but we could manage it. "It's not about the money," I told Diana as we lay in bed. "It's about respect. Ellie didn't even discuss this with us before making plans. And after pushing me aside for Mark, Diana sighed. I know, but what choice do we have? We can't let her wedding day be ruined. The morning of the wedding arrived with picture-perfect weather. I put on my suit, not the one I'd picked out with Ellie months ago, but a simpler one I already owned. Diana looked gorgeous in her mother-of-the-bride dress. As we prepared to leave for the venue, my phone pinged with a text from Jacob. Don't forget to bring the venue check. No, good morning. No, thank you. Just a reminder about money. Something inside me snapped. 12 years of love and support, reduced to an ATM. I stared at the check sitting on our dresser, made out to the wedding venue. You go ahead, I told Diana. I need to make a quick stop first. She looked at me questioningly, but didn't push. Don't be late, she said, kissing me goodbye. I watched her drive away, then went back inside. I sat at our kitchen table, the check in front of me, and wrote a letter to Ellie. I explained how much I loved her, how proud I was of the woman she'd become, and how deeply hurt I was by the events of the past few months. I didn't mention the money. This wasn't about that, not really. This was about 12 years of being dad, only to be cast aside when the original model decided to make a reappearance. I tore up the check. At the venue, I slipped into a seat at the back. Diana was in the front row, looking around nervously for me. The ceremony began, and I watched as Mark, beaming with pride, walked Ellie down the aisle. She looked radiant, and despite everything, my heart swelled with love for her. The girl I had raised was getting married, but I wasn't part of it, not really. During the reception, I kept to the shadows. I watched as Ellie and Mark shared their father-daughter dance, as he gave a tearful speech about how proud he was of his little girl, conveniently omitting the decade he'd been absent. I saw Jacob's family congratulating him on being such a wonderful father, and I saw the uncomfortable expressions on Diana's family's faces. No one approached me. No one seemed to notice I was there at all. It was as if I'd already been erased from the narrative. As the evening wore on, I saw the venue manager pull Jacob aside. Their conversation looked tense. Jacob gestured to Mark, who joined them. More animated discussion. Then Jacob looked around, panic growing on his face. I knew they were looking for me, or rather, for my checkbook. I slipped out before they could find me. The next morning, Diana returned home looking exhausted. Where did you go? She asked. There was chaos when they realized the venue hadn't been paid. I left the letter for Ellie at the gift table, I said. Did she get it? Diana nodded. She read it this morning. She's very upset. Mark couldn't cover the venue cost. Apparently his business venture is actually massive debt. Jacob's parents had to step in at the last minute. I felt a twinge of guilt, not for Jacob's parents, who could clearly afford it, but for potentially ruining Ellie's night. I'm sorry if I embarrassed you. Don't be, Diana said firmly, taking my hand. You've given that girl everything for 12 years. If she and Jacob couldn't even bother to properly discuss the financial arrangements with us instead of just assuming. A week later, I received a text from Ellie. Can we talk? We met at a coffee shop. She looked tired, her honeymoon tint not quite hiding the strain around her eyes. I read your letter, she said without preamble. I didn't realize how much I'd hurt you. You were caught between two fathers, I said. I understand that. No, she shook her head. I had one father who was always there, and one who showed up when it was convenient. I forgot that distinction. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation. There were tears and difficult conversations ahead. But as we sat there, I realized something important. Sometimes the price of being taken for granted is walking away, even when it breaks your heart. Especially when it breaks your heart. Because sometimes, that's the only way they'll finally see you.